somewhere I have a sermon. They hid it. Here it is.
We tried.
They tried to hide it. How many of you thought that was pretty cool what the choir just did? Did it make you feel good? All right. Sure enough, there's the sermon. See, if they really wanted to hide it, they could leave the book and take the papers out. They were kind. How many of you are here today having made some choices already today? Any of you make some choices? Yeah, that's right. How many here, though, make good choices all the time? Oh, I saw some of you start to raise your hand and then you heard the rest of the question. Who here might once in a while waste the power to choose by making poor choices? Let's see. What are some of the most obvious places people make poor choices? Just tell me one or two. At the table. Driving. That's a big one today for some reason. TV. In the what? In the pocketbook. School, shopping. We can make a lot of lists, can't we? In fact, between the two services, I'm starting to think if we ever make any good choices. Well, the fact of the matter is we do, don't we? But sometimes, well, I think almost all the time we figured out that our bad choices sometimes overwhelm our good ones, don't they? Or at least those are the ones we remember. So, if we're going to make 2013 into a better year than 2012, one of the things we have to do is make better choices. So turn to a neighbor and tell them, start making better choices. Isn't it easy to tell somebody else to make a better choice?
Yeah.
That's right. Repeat after me. My choices, determine my future. Repeat after me once more again because it's really true. My choices, determine my future. Today I want to focus on choices because I'm going to tell you that for 2013 to really be a better year, we have to make better choices. We do. As a church, as individuals, as a community, as a country, as a world. It's amazing how our choices affect everything and everyone around us. So today we're going to listen to the life of Moses just a little bit. Don read the passage from Hebrews, and if you still have your Bibles open, Hebrews is a good place to leave it, chapter 11, beginning in verse 23, because in just 4 very short verses, one of the things that happens is Moses teaches us how to make better choices. Now, if I could tell you in 4 easy steps you could make better choices, how many of you would sign up? Okay, today I'm going to give you 4 ways to make better choices, and I expect you all to sign up that raised your hand. Because, let me tell you, it matters. In the passage that Don read from Hebrews, there were actually 5 choices that were made. The first choice is made by Moses' parents, his mom especially. Now we know the story of Moses. We know that he had this kind of amazing birth, and he, they put him in a basket and they put him out in the water, and he floated down to just exactly the right spot so he could be saved by Pharaoh's daughter. And then he was raised in the house of Pharaoh. Well, the first decision was the decision to protect Moses. And his parents made that decision. But all of the rest of the decisions that we're going to talk about, Moses made. Now, all of that is important because what I want you to know is that your parents made some decisions about you. How many of you believe that? Oh, good. Other people have made some decisions about you. How many of you believe that? Good. How many of you know, though, that no matter what decisions your parents made or what decisions other people around you made, you still get to make choices that determine your future? And we'll come back to that in a little bit. It's really important. So Moses makes 4 choices after he grows up. And it doesn't really matter if you're grown up or not, just so you know. These 4 choices will change your life. They will change your world, and they will change your church. The first choice that Moses makes is the choice. Let's see how to best put it. It's the choice to refuse to let other people define who you are. Now, God didn't create you to be someone or to be what or who someone else wants you to be. If you're a parent here, do you ever do like I did? I told my daughter, I want you to grow up to be a doctor so you can take care of me when I get older. Any of you ever make statements like that? Some of you aren't telling the truth. Maybe it's not a doctor. Maybe you want them to be a lawyer so they can take care of your will when you get older. Or a pharmacist. That's better, yeah. So we can get our drugs. No. The fact of the matter is, we always hope for our children to grow up and be successful and wonderful, and sometimes we give them jobs that we think that they ought to do and become and be, and they always, or almost always, go, but Dad, that's not what I want to do. So my daughter's growing up to be a speech pathologist. She's going to help people learn to re-speak after they have a stroke. It's pretty cool. Could be a good skill. Now, the fact is that no matter what you choose to be in life, that really doesn't even define who you are either. I know because you're all looking at me, and that's Pastor David up there, and you all have a figment of your imagination of what that means. Sometimes pastors get put up on pedestals. And sometimes pastors get identified as the only guys in the room that never do anything wrong. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Well, the choice that Moses makes is like that. He had an identity crisis. Any of you ever have an identity crisis? Who am I? Who am I going to be? Moses had 2 choices. By the way, that's all the choices you actually ever have at any one time is 2. Moses, bless his heart, grew up in the palace. He grew up with the best education. He grew up with the best cable television. He grew up with the best fan system. He grew up with every advantage that being Pharaoh's grandson could afford him. He grew up like 16th in the line from the throne. He was important. He was powerful. He had everything he could want. That was one of his choices. He could choose to live that way. And most of us look at that and go, boy, I'd like to sign up for that. Now the second identity, though, the crisis came when he realized that Yes, I grew up as Pharaoh's grandson, but I'm also a Jewish child. The crisis, of course, is in the world that Moses lived, being Hebrew meant being a slave. And being a slave means you have no education. Being a slave means you have no property. Being a slave means you do whatever somebody else tells you to do when they tell you to do it, no matter if you want to or not. So Moses had an identity crisis. He could be rich and powerful with the best of life, or he could be destitute and die. He had two choices. Question: what would you do? What would you choose to do? He could pretend to be Pharaoh's grandson and have fame and luxury and fortune and a lifestyle that was wonderful. Or he could admit his Jewish heritage and be humiliated, thrown out into slavery. Well, the fact is, Moses refused to live the law. He chose to live as God created him, as a Hebrew. He insisted, in fact, on being what God created him and who God created him to be. Now, I'm pretty sure that none of you were born and brought into Pharaoh's household as a child, or a king, or a queen. None of you were in the president's household growing up, were you? You see, so you've all thought, well, this really isn't that important to me. But let me ask you this question. Who is it or what is it that defines who you are? Is it the television? Is it your culture? Is it perhaps your social setting or your family? Or is it God? Romans 12 that Don read has this word, and I'm reading this from the Phillips version. It says, "Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remold your minds from inside so that you can prove in practice what the plan of God for you is." I love that. Who do you let mold you and shape you? The world or God? The first choice that Moses makes is to choose to let God be the one who determines who he is. And if you want 2013 to be a better year than 2012, your first choice must be to let God mold you and help you become who God has called you to be. The second choice. Now, the first choice seems like it's a head thing. And how many of you can see that that's an easy thing to do? You know, it's an easy decision. We're going to let God be determined. It's easy to say. I think it's harder to carry out. The second one, the second choice that Moses makes is he chooses short-term pain for long-term gain. Any of you ever hear the saying, no pain, no gain? And it usually has to do with working out. And I like to tell this story. When I started to lose weight, I had a coach tell me some things I could do that would help. Her name's Angie. She runs boot camps for women. Physical fitness boot camps for women. And as soon as she started telling me what I was going to have to do, I was pretty sure I wasn't tough enough to be in any of her groups. She says, "Pastor David, you only have to do one thing. We're going to get your aerobic stuff going good and your heart stronger, and it's going to help you lose weight, and you'll feel better all the time. It says, tomorrow morning when you get up, put your tennis shoes on and run up and down your stairs for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Now, how many of you think 5 minutes is a long time? If you're running up and down stairs, it's forever. And so every day for 5 minutes, I ran up and down the stairs. On Tuesday, my legs killed me. On Wednesday, they weren't any better. On Thursday, they still hurt some. But on Friday, it had kind of tapered off. And I went, oh, this is cool. So on Sunday, she calls me up. She says, well, Pastor David, you did good. We're going to add 2 minutes. Monday morning, up and down the stairs, just as fast as I can go, for 7 minutes. Guess what? On Tuesday, my legs hurt again. On Wednesday, they still hurt. On Thursday, they didn't hurt so much. And on Friday, I went up and down those stairs. Great! Sunday, Angie calls. 10 minutes tomorrow. Okay. Wasn't so bad. Hurt for a couple of days. The next week, 15 minutes. She says, if you do 15 minutes of stairs every day, your heart's going to be in great shape. You know what? My legs don't hurt when I do stairs. Any of you want to come do stairs with me in the morning? All right. None of the people who really need to are raising their hand. A little bit of pain for a lot of gain. It works. The problem is most of us suffer from this idea that our world ought to be filled with instant gratification. Any of you ever come to the conclusion that the world was there to serve you and to satisfy every whim that you have? You aren't raising your hand, but we still have McDonald's drive-thrus. We have bank drive-thrus. We have this drive-thru. We have pharmacy drive-thrus. I always thought pharmacy drive-thrus were smart. That's where all drugs ought to be sold, because then sick people don't have to be in the same room with well people. Hebrews 11:25 puts it this way: Moses chose to be mistreated with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of his world. Yes, it would have been easier for me not to run up and down the stairs. Yes, it would be easier for us not to do the painful things up front, but it's always, always, always a matter of maturity for us to decide that it's okay to hurt for a little bit so that we can have long-term gain. At my house, we called it growing up. That's right. We called it finding and taking responsibility. Any of you ever tell somebody you need to get more responsible? Any of you ever look in the mirror and say, I need to take some responsibility here? You need to practice that, okay? You see, one of the things that I want you to know from this is that you can live as close to God or as far from God as you want. It's your responsibility. You see, the way I like to picture it is God's right here beside me. And God will be right here beside me no matter what I do, no matter where I go, no matter what happens. The only time I get farther away from God is when I do this. The only time you get further away from God is when you do this. Now, the good news is God is a jealous and persistent God. When you do this, you know what God does? This. He just follows you. But sometimes we let him get behind us so we don't see him. And you know, if you can't see it, you don't think it's there. We let God get out of our view and we lose it. You see, we need to learn to accept some responsibility for our faith and for our spirituality and for our spiritual lives. You can't live on the coattails of your wives or your husbands. You can't live on the coattails. You know, my mother was a saint. Any of you ever have a saint for a mom? That's not good enough. It was good enough for mom, but it's not good enough for you. So the second rule is to choose pain and accept responsibility. Moses did. The third rule, the third choice that Moses makes, he chooses God's value over the values of the world. Listen to this. Moses regarded disgrace. This is verse 26. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. Moses made a value judgment. Who here has made a value judgment in their life? We make them all the time. Every time, every decision we make probably is a value judgment. But Moses did something really important. He clarified what was the most important thing to him when he was making a choice. He clarified what mattered most in his life, which makes me want to ask us this question. Have you and I clarified what matters most in our lives? If I ask you in the margins of your bulletin to put down 1, 2, and 3 and put by each one your top 3 values, your core values, what it is you believed in, what it is you honored, what it is you valued most, could you do it? That's an exercise you should do. If you need a hint, I'll give you one. Would you like a hint? Yes? Look at where you spend your money. Look at your checkbook. Because where you spend your money is where you're committed. It's true. A couple of little secrets about this. If you haven't identified your 3 most important values, you can't live by them. You can't live by what you don't know. And second, and this is the biggest secret of all, if you don't decide what matters most to you, somebody else will. And it might not be somebody who has your best interests at heart. You can choose what the world values, or you can choose what God values. You can choose popularity and prestige and prosperness, or you can choose purpose. That's right. You can choose purpose. You can choose people. You can choose peace of mind. One of the things that I really believe is that those are the 3 things that God would have us choose. God would choose for us to have purpose in our life, His purpose, not ours. God would choose for us to value people more than possessions. And I think we struggle with that sometimes. And thirdly, I think that God values peace of mind over possessions. Because have you ever noticed people with lots and lots of possessions tend to have no peace of mind over them? It's true. But peace of mind allows you to relax from thinking about possessions. You can't buy peace of mind like you can buy most possessions. Because peace of mind comes from who you are inside. Moses gave up what most of us spend our lives trying to get. Why? Because he was looking to the promised land. He had a vision. He had a purpose. He had a hope. He had a goal. That's what the weekend of discovery is about. It's about helping us find out who we are and who we are as a church and what's going on in our community and how our church is going to relate to our community But it starts with our deciding what our purpose is in life. And that begins with you deciding who you are and what your purpose in life is. And that does bring us to the fourth choice that Moses made. When he decided that purpose was more important, and vision was more important, and the final goal was more important, he began to live, and this was his fourth choice, by faith instead of by fear. He no longer, because he could see the end, had to worry about Pharaoh or the people or the enemies, because he knew where he was going, and he wasn't going to let anything get in his way of where he's going. By faith, verse 27 says, Moses left Egypt not fearing the king, and he persevered because he saw the one who was invisible. Pharaoh was not invisible. Pharaoh was the most powerful, most fearful man in the world. Pharaoh had armies and people at his disposal. He could wipe out whole nations with just one word. But Moses wasn't afraid. The key for us always is who we're going to put our faith in. Galatians 2:16 says it this way: no one can please God by simply obeying the law. So we put our faith in Jesus Christ, and God accepts us. In other words, until we put our faith in Jesus Christ, God doesn't accept who we are. That's not good enough. So how do you make and keep these choices? Well, the first thing you do is you decide. Most of us live in a world trying not to have to decide things. How many of you have had this conversation at home? What would you like for dinner? I don't know. What would you like? Any of you ever had that decision? You know, here's a counselor's assignment. The next time somebody says, what do you want? Don't say, I don't know. Make a decision. Every person in this room could change their world if when they're asked that question, they'd say, I want pizza, or I want steak, or I want a salad, or I want something specific. You'll surprise the people around you, too. It'll change your world, by the way. And don't do it just over a meal. We ask that question all the time. And we generally want to let somebody else make every decision for us because I believe it's easier. So practice making decisions. Get some support from a small group. We're going to have some small groups coming up in the season of Lent. During the season of Lent, we're going to be doing a program called What on Earth Are You Here For? Because we want to know. The nominating committee wants to know. The ministry divisions of this church need to know. Get some support. Then ask and expect God to help you. You know, the next time somebody says, well, what do you want for dinner? Take 30 seconds and say, Lord, what do I want for dinner? You know, I know, you're laughing at me. But you know what that does? That gives you time to hear what your brain already knows. Because you know what you want for dinner. The third thing to do is focus. Focus on the end result. Focus on where we're going Focus on the promised land. Focus on the promised Savior. Focus on what's coming. Because when you focus on the prize, when you focus on the target, when you focus on where God wants us to go, we do it all together. And when that happens, making choices becomes a matter of fact and a joy. Because your choices become focused on where we're going together instead of on where the arrows are going. So to make 2013 a better year, we have to make some choices. Better choices. The choices that Moses made. Choices not to be defined by anyone other than God. Choices to suffer some short-term pain for long-term gain. Choices that are based on the value God puts before us instead of what the world says is important. And choices that point to the goal. And all of God's people said, Amen. Everybody gets to make a choice whether or not to be a disciple of Jesus or not. If you've never made that decision, we invite you to do that by coming forward as we sing the song. Some of you need to make a choice perhaps to make First Christian Church your church home even though you've already been baptized. You can transfer your membership to the life and work and witness of this church. Some of you need to make choices on whether or not you're going to be a part of the weekend of discovery and celebration. That blue card, it's calling your name. More importantly, your God is calling you to be a part of that weekend. I'm telling you the truth. God has put that weekend there for all of us. That blue card can be put in the offering tray or given to Glenn or I, mailed into the office. It's time to decide who we're going to follow. Would you stand with me and make those decisions as we sing, I Have Decided?